Good morning to all of you. Warm welcome to Zoom webinar on practical approach on managing ECG anomalies, organized by GMOA and Society for Health Research and Innovation. Kindly mute your microphones and turn off your camera during the presentation and use the chat box to clear your doubts. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Manura M. Lekam-Wattage, consultant cardiac electrophysiologist, currently attached to the National Hospital, Kandy. Dr. Lekam-Wattage has graduated from the Medical Faculty, University of Colombo in 2005 and secured his postgraduate qualification in MD Medicine from Postgraduate Institute of Medicine, Colombo in 2011. He had undergone training in cardiology and cardiac electrophysiology at National Hospital of Colombo and Freeman Royal Hospital, Newcastle, United Kingdom. Over to you, sir.
Thank you for kind introduction and good morning, everyone. And thanks, I should thank GMOA and Sri for inviting me for this presentation. Since we have to read ECGs from the day we got our graduation till we probably die or till we stop our practice, we need to keep update on how to read an ECG. They're one of the basic investigations that we do routinely in almost many of our patients. And as primary care physicians, you will be doing ECG at OPD level and at your GP practice, and many of you all may be taking ECGs and you may be having ECG machines to take ECGs at your practices. I'll be discussing rhythm abnormalities on ECG today. In future, you will get a lecture on ischemic heart disease and ECG changes. And I'll give a basic introduction to ECGs and I'll discuss the rhythm abnormalities today. So as you all know, the cardiac conduction system is there is a cardiac conduction system with a pacemaker, the SA node, which has an automaticity or spontaneous depolarization capacity at 70 to 80 beats per minute, which runs our heart in most of the time. Okay, so the rate is kept under control by the vagal innervation. So it's generally kept at 60 to 70 beats per minute. The impulses generated at the SA node is propagated through the atria and then comes to the AV node and the bundle of His, which is the only electrical connection between the atria and the ventricles. Through the AV node and the bundle of His, the impulse propagate down into the bundle branches, right and left bundles, and then they go through the Purkinje system and depolarize the ventricles. When you get an ECG, there are waves, intervals, and durations that you have to know about. The P wave on the ECG is formed by the atrial depolarization. Okay, and it's not due to sinus node depolarization. It's due to atrial depolarization. And then it is followed by a PR interval of up to 200 milliseconds maximum. That is a one large square, which is mainly due to the AV nodal delay, which allows atrial blood to be pumped into the ventricles to make a good cardiac output. And this AV delay prevents fast atrial rhythms from traveling down the His-Purkinje system and make inappropriate tachycardias leading to sudden cardiac death. For instance, AF is not conducted fast into the ventricles because of the AV node. Because of the AV node only we are surviving today. So we don't get VF. AF is not turned into VF because of the AV node. Okay. So then the ventricles are depolarized and that forms the QRS complex, which is a narrow complex. It should be less than 3 small squares in duration. And then there is an isoelectric segment, which is called the ST segment. There is neither depolarization nor repolarization happens. It's a resting phase electrically, followed by a repolarization phase of the ventricles, forming a T wave. And ECG has 12 leads. Six leads are considered limb leads and 6 are considered precordial or chest leads. 6 limb leads are looking at the heart in a vertical plane. This is just to refresh your knowledge on ECG, okay? And the 6 chest leads look at the heart in horizontal plane. So the limb leads look at the heart in vertical plane, and the chest leads look at the heart in horizontal plane. And if you record ECG at your practice, or if you have to take ECG at your place of work, for instance, I used to take ECG when I was an MOETU. So there was no ECG technician. So we had to take the ECG, properly place the chest leads. That is very important. And don't alter limb leads as well. When you place chest leads, it's very important to place the V1 and V2 on either side of the sternum at 4th intercostal space, V4 at 5th intercostal space in the mid-clavicular line, and V3 in between, and V6 at the 5th intercostal space at the anterior axillary line, and V5 in between. Because we see many of the ECGs taken at the GP practices are not in good quality. So we have to maintain our quality as well when you do a job. And document the name, age, the date and time of the ECG that you have taken, and check whether all the 12 leads are recorded properly. And your machine has to be calibrated at 25 millimeters per second, the speed, and the height should be calibrated at 1 centimeter per millivolt. If you change these, we will get abnormal ECGs, which are pseudo abnormalities that we are going to record. So make sure that your calibration is correct with the speed at 25 millimeters per second and the height is at 1 centimeter per millivolt. A 40-year-old male, now we'll start reading ECGs. A 40-year-old male with non-specific chest pain has undergone this ECG at your practice. What are your thoughts? Is it normal or is it abnormal? Look at the rate. Rate is fine. It's around 75. It's regular. It's regular. There are P waves in front of each QRS complex. So all the P waves are conducted. So, and as you see, all the limb leads are fine. This Q wave is this is a physiological Q wave, just disregard that. Isolated Q in lead 3. The QRS complexes are narrow. The PR interval is normal. And there is positive progression of the chest lead from V1 to V6. There is a positive progression. That transition should happen at V3, V4 level. Okay. V3 should record at least 3 small squares of R wave, and V4 should be positive. Okay. So V6 is a positive lead. So there is positive progression of the R wave. That shows that there is electrically normal activity and mechanically also supposed to be normal. So ejection fraction almost 60 in this case. We can have an idea about the cardiac functions on that. And note that AVR is always negative. It can never be positive. V1 should never be positive. If AVR is positive, think about dextrocardia. Okay. If V1 is positive, there are around 5 differentials that you have to think about. We'll discuss few in future slides. Okay. If you interpret the ECG in the following order, you might not miss many of the rhythm abnormalities. Calculate the rate, check whether the ECG is regular or irregular. And what is the rhythm? Is it sinus rhythm? Are all the P waves being conducted or is it not? How do you calculate the rate? Count the number of large squares between two RR intervals and divide 300 by that number of large squares. So we'll do some exercise. Yeah, go through these 3 rhythm strips and try to calculate the heart rate. Here there are 1, 2, 3, 4 large squares. So divide 300 by 4, should be 75. And here it's around 5 large squares. So the rate comes to around 60. Here it's between 2 to 3, 2.5. So the rate is between 120 to 130. Okay, so there is tachycardia. These are normal rates. And how do you check whether the ECG is regular or not? Use a piece of paper with your pen and mark 2 RR intervals, 2 to 3 RR intervals, and move that caliper across the rhythm strip and make sure all the QRS complexes fall regularly at that caliper. If it is so, it's a regular rhythm. If it is not, it's an irregular rhythm, which is quite helpful when the rates are fast, especially in atrial fibrillation and atrial flutter. Initially, you might think in a patient in tachycardia is having sometimes a sinus tachycardia with a regular rhythm, regular ECG. But if you use this caliper and you might come across subtle differences, then only you will look into the P wave morphology. If you don't see P waves, that's atrial fibrillation. If you see P waves, that should be an atrial flutter with variable block. So irregular narrow complex tachycardia, if you come across, should be atrial fibrillation, the commonest tachyarrhythmia in our clinical practice, or it can be atrial flutter with variable block. Then the rhythm, check whether all the P waves are conducted and they are associated with the following QRS complex. So that is sinus rhythm. And where do you look for those P waves, these P waves? In the inferior leads, 2, 3 AVF and V1. But at your level, if you can remember, I look at rhythm strip, lead 2, or 2, 3 AVF. Those leads should record a positive P wave. Then we can make sure that's a sinus P wave. So that's a rhythm. So what are the symptoms of arrhythmia? Many of them can be asymptomatic, and at your clinical examination, you would have detected an irregular pulse. Then you would have decided to go for an ECG. Sometimes you detect slow pulse rates, less than 60, bradycardia, more than 100, tachycardia. Then you would have requested an ECG. You would have detected a cardiac murmur. Then, as a basic investigation, you must do an ECG. And when you auscultate again, listen for a loud P2. Always compare with the aortic sound, aortic A2 with pulmonary sound. If the P2 is louder than, if the pulmonary sound is louder than the aortic sound, so that's a loud P2. So there should be an explanation for that, pulmonary hypertension. If the patient has a bradycardia, what are the symptoms of arrhythmias? We were discussing about asymptomatic arrhythmias. What are the symptoms of arrhythmias? Both bradyarrhythmias and tachyarrhythmias share many of the symptoms common to both. So bradyarrhythmia patients with bradycardia, pulse rate less than 60 they come to you with tiredness, shortness of breath on exertion, they will tell වෙනද වගේ වැඩ කරන්න බෑ හරි මහන්සි නිදා ගන්නමයි හිතෙන්නේ and pre-syncope and syncope. What do you mean by pre-syncope? කලන්තේ දාන්න වගේ. That is very important in our population. It's very difficult to get the real symptom out of them. They will say කරක වෙනවා විසි වෙනවා and all. So we have to ask particularly as කරුවල වෙලා යනවාද as කරුවල වෙලා අඟපණ නැති වෙලා යනවාද as කරුවල අඟපණ නැති වෙලා දාඩිය දාගෙන වගේ එනවාද සිහි නැති වෙන්න එනවා වගේ දැනෙනවාද ඔව් සිහි නැති වෙලා ඇදගෙන වැටෙනවාද. Those are the symptoms that we have to ask for, pre-syncope and syncope. Tachyarrhythmias again come with, they are mainly, the main presenting complaint is palpitations, but again SOB, they can come with chest pain, even bradyarrhythmias can come with chest pain, angina. Pre-syncope and syncope, or there can be sudden loss of consciousness without any warning. They just lose their consciousness. Then following which they develop a fit also. Is it a seizure? So sometimes there are overlaps. Some seizures are, some arrhythmias are misdiagnosed as seizures and they are on long-term anti-epileptics. So history may be presenting complaint may be seizures, but there will be an underlying arrhythmia, especially tachyarrhythmia. So good to go through their ECG all the time. Excuse me, can I, excuse me, sir. Can you move this taskbar away? I can't see the question, the heading. Okay, so I'll try to, I can't see the question, unfortunately. Yeah, there I can see, if you can read it, yeah. Because of the Zoom software, I can't see the question. A 70-year-old female with hypertension on atenolol 50 mg daily comes to us with shortness of breath. Any abnormalities that you have already detected? What is the rate? It is, we'll calculate it here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, around 40, 50 to 40. Is it regular? Yeah, appears regular, except this bit irregularity is there, but that's due to, I'll discuss it later. So there is bradycardia. We'll consider this as regular. All the QRS complexes are preceded by a P wave, which is normal looking upright into 3 AVFs, so sinus. QRS complexes are narrow, so the diagnosis is
sinus bradycardia.
Sinus bradycardia. Why is she bradycardic? Then you have to go through the history. The patient is a hypertensive on atenolol. Obviously, there are drugs known to cause bradycardia. One of the commonest causes these days is bradycardia. But why all of a sudden a patient on atenolol has come to us with symptomatic bradycardia? He should have been on atenolol for quite some time. And these days it's not anywhere a first-line drug, which would have been started many years ago, and she would have tolerated it for a long time, and now coming with brady symptoms and bradycardia. So, yeah, whether she has developed something new. Yeah. So sinus bradycardia is part of aging, and it's part of physical training. Many of our farming community, the manual laborers, they have sinus bradycardia. If they are asymptomatic, if they don't have symptoms, manual laborers, of course, they work very hard. Farmers work very hard, and they are asymptomatic. They can do whatever the work they are given. So if there is sinus bradycardia asymptomatic, we don't have to worry about it. But exclude other causes like drugs, beta blockers, including eye drops, like timolol eye drop for glaucoma. And are they on grade controlling calcium channel blockers like verapamil and diltiazem, or any other antiarrhythmics, amiodarone, digoxin? And if you can't see anything, why don't you order a TSH and a creatinine and a electrolyte? And if everything is all right, they have developed sick sinus syndrome. That's what I told you at the beginning. The patient who has been tolerating atenolol for quite some time now coming with bradycardia, think about sick sinus syndrome, which needs a permanent pacemaker to improve their symptoms. Sick sinus syndrome is not going to kill the patient. Heart blocks can kill the patient. So sick sinus syndrome, you can do referral, whether it's urgent or routine, you can decide. But heart blocks are different. We'll discuss as we go on. A 27-year-old female with no past medical history comes with palpitation and SOB. I've only given some leads, 1, 2, 3. But is the rate? A rate is given here, 102, it says tachycardia. Is it regular? Yeah, it's regular. Is there a P wave in front of each QRS? Yeah, no missed P waves. Are the P waves looking normal? Yeah, upright in 2, 3. We don't have the rest of the ECG. So it's sinus tachycardia. So 27-year-old female comes to you with sinus tachycardia. What do you think? Check the temperature. Check whether the patient has fever or whether there is any focus of infection. Check whether the patient is pale. Ask whether she has menorrhagia or any PR bleeding. Look for anemia. And listen for lung bases to feel whether the patient is in heart failure, whether heart failure is causing tachycardia. There's no past medical history, but this is the first presentation of heart failure. JVP is not elevated, no edema, lung bases clear, less like, no? Asymptomatic patient with good exercise tolerance, yes. Then you can think of whether the patient is pregnant. Ask for the last menstrual period and check urine for urine for pregnancy test you can do. And if it's a male, ask whether the patient is taking alcohol. Alcohol can give rise to sinus tachycardia. And one of the most important investigation, few of the most important investigations are do the hemoglobin and do a TSH to see whether the patient is thyrotoxic. If everything is excluded, then think whether the patient is anxious. It's a diagnosis by exclusion, and there is an electrical disorder or electrical disorder of the heart called inappropriate sinus tachycardia. Patient may be symptomatic with sinus tachycardia, then we have to manage that. Needs further evaluation and management. If you have done the basic investigations, you can do a routine referral to a tertiary care center where the electrophysiological facilities are available. We'll arrange a 2D echo, a Holter, and other EP evaluations if necessary, and then we can manage this tachycardia if the patient is symptomatic. Always look for secondary causes. At your level, if you can identify a secondary cause, yes, you treat that. 3 females in their 70s with no past medical history comes with recurrent pre-syncope and shortness of breath. 3 ECGs with bradycardia, rhythm strips. Here, the rate is around between 40 to 50. There's a preceding P wave appears normal, so sinus. Look at the first ECG. It's sinus bradycardia. Now look at number 2 and 3 together. You have upright P in front of QRS complexes. They're irregular. It's an irregular bradycardia because some beats are followed by a long electrical silence. That's called a pause. If you see these are features of sick sinus syndrome. When the sinus node is diseased, especially due to aging or associated comorbidities like ischemic heart disease or any other cardiomyopathy, or due to drugs which can exaggerate the sick sinus syndrome like beta blockers and rate controlling calcium channel blockers, patients may go into sick sinus syndrome. So they can present with sinus bradycardia. This is you don't have to know the sinus exit block and a long sinus pause. These are not, however long the pauses are, not going to kill the patient, but they can develop syncope and fall and have a fractured neck of femur or Colles fracture. So good to refer them appropriately so we can give them the definitive management of a pacemaker. Stop offending medical drugs like beta blockers, calcium channel blockers. Look for hypothyroidism and correct it, TSH. And do appropriate referral. You may, if you are going to stop atenolol, diltiazem or verapamil, you can replace them with something like amlodipine, non-rate controlling calcium channel blocker, which of course increase the heart rate. It can increase the sinus rate. Till we go for a pacemaker. Then we'll move on to the next couple of rhythm strips. A 60-year-old male with COPD with recurrent palpitations. And you see the first EC, look at the first rhythm strip. You know, there's bradycardia, sinus bradycardia. Maybe he's on diltiazem or verapamil for hypertension. And here it's a bit irregular. And here, what is it beat? And if you look at this rhythm strip, see, so there is a pause after 2 beats. So what is it beat? Is it a sinus beat or something else? QRS is narrow. Look at the P wave. P wave is supposed to be upright in inferior lead, 2-3 AVF, but here it's negative. So what is that? That's an atrial ectopic. So atrial ectopic or PAC, premature atrial complex or premature atrial contraction. So many terminologies, but atrial ectopic it is. So after that, there is a compensatory pause. Here, the patient is in atrial bigeminy. This is a sinus P2, 3 AVF upright, but here they are a bit altered. See the morphology? It's a bit altered. It's coming from somewhere else. So the atrial ectopic coming regularly, one after the other. So this is called atrial bigeminy. If the patient is symptomatic, if you see only one PAC on the ECG, just forget about that if the patient is asymptomatic. But make sure that you ask for symptoms in the next visit. If you see so many PACs, better to get evaluation at a higher center where the cardiology and EP facilities are available. Here in the given history, he has many reasons to have atrial ectopics. The COPD patient, you know, COPD leads to pulmonary hypertension. So it leads to P. pulmonale sometimes, and there is dilatation of the right atrium. Dilated atria are giving rise to atrial ectopics. If the patient has pulmonary hypertension or mitral valve disease, the atria are dilated. Dilated atria produce these atrial ectopics most of the time, but can be idiopathic. Usually they do not need further evaluation and management unless they are symptomatic. Mind you, it's not benign always, because these atrial ectopics are the ones which precipitate atrial fibrillation or suprarenal tachycardia. So that's why it's important to manage atrial ectopics appropriately. Okay, ask for symptoms, ask whether the patient has palpitation. Is there any history of stroke which could have been due to atrial fibrillation? Have you been evaluated for atrial fibrillation earlier? In that kind of situation, you better refer. But in a young patient, asymptomatic, no evidence of cardiac disease, one PAC, history of bronchial asthma only, then you can, patients with bronchial asthma, of course, have atrial ectopics on their ECGs when the disease is not under control, and when they are on a lot of sympathomimetic drugs, including salbutamol, deriphyllin, and everything which stimulate atrial myocardium. So in that kind of situation, you just forget it. And once the patient is under control and still continuing to have atrial ectopics, then needs evaluation. Next ECG. 72-year-old male with hypertension, ischemic heart disease comes with SOB. There is tachycardia, you can see. Is it a regular tachycardia or irregular tachycardia? You use a caliper. It's an irregular tachycardia, you can see. The RR intervals vary. The rate is going above 150 at times, even 100, more than 200 at times. Here it's going at almost 260, 70. And can you see P waves? No P waves can be seen. So irregular narrow complex tachycardia with no P waves, it's atrial fibrillation. This is fast atrial fibrillation. You have to admit the patient. This is very fast. The patient is not going to sustain this with the given background of hypertension and ischemic heart disease. The cardiac reserves are limited. He can't run this tachycardia for a long time. He will go into heart failure. So we have to admit and control the arrhythmia. A 55-year-old male with mitral valve replacement 10 years ago, complaints of palpitations. Here is the ECG. What is the rate? She's in male, yeah. So he's in tachycardia rate. The rate is sometimes faster. It's irregular. If you use the caliper, you can see it's irregular. Yeah, irregular. Can you see P waves? Yeah, you see so many P waves in the pattern of sawtooth appearance. Okay, so what is the diagnosis? I told you if it's a narrow, complex, irregular tachycardia, you have two differential diagnoses. One we discussed earlier, atrial fibrillation. This is the second one, atrial flutter with variable block. Yeah. If the patient is hemodynamically stable, he would tolerate, the patient, I'll discuss the management a bit later. So this is atrial flutter with variable block. What is the significance of, why are we worried about AF and flutters? Because they carry high morbidity and mortality. They'll be very symptomatic if we do not control their rates and rhythms appropriately. And the risk of stroke is very high. And they will go into a reversible form of LV dysfunction, which we call tachycardiomyopathy. If we treat the tachycardia, the LV functions will improve and they will have a good quality life. So it's quite common. These two arrhythmias are quite common in the community. So they have to be managed appropriately to give them a good quality of life and to reduce their mortality. How do we treat them? Yeah, if they come to you with for the first time, please admit them. So we can do further evaluation. We can, if the onset is within 48 hours, we can go for cardioversion, either electrically by DC cardioversion or pharmacologically with IV amiodarone. If we can't bring them back to sinus rhythm due to underlying structural heart disease, then our next therapeutic option is rate control. They have to be maintained their heart rates between 60 to 110. 110 is while they are exercising. Okay, when they do their maximum level of activity, their heart rate should be kept in this range. The next therapeutic option is stroke prevention, either aspirin or anticoagulation. anticoagulation in the form of warfarin, or there are novel anticoagulants still not licensed in Sri Lanka, but they are quite useful, like rivaroxaban, apixaban, and dabigatran. They are available in the country off license though. Quite useful, but expensive. So how do we decide whether the patient needs anticoagulation? You can go through at your primary care level, CHAD score, if you know CHADS2 score. If the patient has, if each letter gets 1 except the stroke, where it gets 2. So if the patient has heart failure, hypertension, or older than 75, diabetes, they score 1 point each. And if they have a history of stroke or TIA, they get 2 points. So if the score is more than 1, that is 2 to 6, they need anticoagulation. If they score 1, that's a gray area that we have to further analyze with CHADS. Will be done at our level, tertiary care level. If the score is 0, aspirin is enough for stroke prevention. So just know about CHADS2 score in AF and atrial flutters to decide on antiplatelet or anticoagulation therapy for stroke prevention. Asymptomatic, moving on, asymptomatic 30-year-old patient with irregular pulse. What do you think? Look at this beat. Is it a sinus beat? Is it normal? No, it's abnormal. It's not narrow. See, look at the sinus beats. They are less than 3 small squares. Narrow. Yeah, it's broad. Equal or more than 3 squares. So it's, and the ST segments are going in the opposite direction of the R wave. URS duration. This is a PVC or ventricular ectopic. Finding a single ventricular ectopic in asymptomatic patient with no comorbidities, yeah, you can observe and follow them up and ask for symptoms. If they develop palpitations, shortness of breath on exertion, or pre-syncope, ask them, you better refer them to a center where facility is available to do a 2D echo and Holter and do the further evaluation, which we can ablate. Many of these ectopics can be ablated when necessary. And moving on, the ectopics here, the PVCs are coming at regular intervals. When they come here, they come after 2 sinus beats. So this is called trigeminy. If they come after each sinus beat, it's called bigeminy. So bigeminy, trigeminy are rhythms that you would come across during your day-to-day practice. Don't be afraid of these bigeminis and trigeminis. They're quite stable, but the patients have, if the patient is symptomatic, yes, get early opinion. If they're asymptomatic, yes, still refer them, but quite stable, yeah, ask them to go to the tertiary care center with facilities with a referral letter. Okay. You see, there are various behaviors of these ectopics. We were discussing about trigeminis, bigeminis here. 2 consecutive ectopics. They are called couplets. And here they're progressing now. That's why the ectopics are not benign all the time. They can progress into a stage where they will lead to non-sustained VTs like this. The patient will be quite symptomatic. They will come to you with palpitations, pre-syncope, tiredness, SOB. You see this, immediate referral. Admit them for further evaluation. If you see an unsustained VT, better to admit them then and there for further evaluation and management of the arrhythmia. I would have given you this question. A 54-year-old with past history of anterior myocardial infarction complains of shortness of breath of 1 day duration. But it's a tachycardia. Heart rate is around here 150. What is it? Is it a narrow complex tachycardia or a broad complex tachycardia? It's a broad complex tachycardia. Look at the QRS duration. It is more than 120. If you see a broad complex regular tachycardia, that is ventricular tachycardia until proved otherwise. Okay, that has to be kept in mind. A broad complex regular tachycardia is ventricular tachycardia until proved otherwise. So immediately admit them to the center where the facilities are available for cardioversion, either electrically or medically, pharmacologically. So they need urgent attention. Otherwise, they will go into heart failure, or even these can degenerate into ventricular fibrillation. If the patient's heart is normal, echo is normal, they might tolerate this for quite some time. But you have to admit, if you see a VT, yes, this is VT, identify this as a VT, admit it. 40-year-old army soldier with gastroesophageal symptoms, reflux symptoms. You have done ECG just in case to exclude any ischemia. We can't take a chance anyway. If the symptoms are vague, yeah, better to rule out the dangerous ones, the sinister ones, which can threaten the life of the patient. And you have got this ECG from one of our patients, not very good in quality. But what is the abnormality you see here? The rate is around 60. We call it 60 to between 60 to 50 to 61. Yeah, 60. It's regular, narrow complexes. There are P waves in front of each QRS complex in the inferior leads, 2, 3, AVF. Yeah, upright sinus rhythm. But what is the abnormality? P waves and QRS are quite apart. It's a long PR segment. PR interval is more than one large square. So what is this? This is a first degree heart block. It's a first degree heart block. So what do you do now? He's a 40-year-old army soldier. Quite healthy chap. No history of pre-syncope, nothing. So don't worry. This is a normal finding in the community. But if the patient comes to you with shortness of breath, pre-syncope, then it needs further evaluation. If the patient is asymptomatic, first degree heart block is a normal variation. And sometimes they develop palpitations, and then also you have to refer. Okay. If the patient is asymptomatic, yeah, just follow them up. That can be a normal variation. 3 females in their 80s coming to us with recurrent pre-syncope and falls. So here, the first one comes with the fall. First go through B, the second ECG. What is that? There is bradycardia. Rate is around 50, 1, 2, 3, 4, more, yeah, less than that, 40. Narrow complexes, and there is a P, it's regular bradycardia. There is a P wave in front of each QRS. Is that all? Is it sinus bradycardia? No, we are missing something here. There's something here. Yeah, see, this is exactly the same as the P wave. So it's a missed P wave. One P is not getting conducted into the ventricles. So out of the 2 P's, only one is getting conducted. This is called 2:1 block. It's a form of second degree heart block. Look at number 3. See, there is bradycardia. Rate is around 40, I suppose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah, 40. They are broad. Complexes are broad. Look at the P waves. There are more P waves than QRS complexes, like here also. The more P waves. In heart blocks, you see more P waves on the ECG than the QRS complexes. But here there was, in B, there was an association. Every other beat was getting conducted into the ventricle. So that's why we call it 2:1 block. But what's happening here? Here, we'll start from here. You might think it's a first degree, but there is something here. abnormal. And here again a PR interval, the P-like thing here. And if you use a caliper here, it's very short. And here there no visible P wave. It's actually buried within the QRS. So if you use a caliper and mark the RR intervals, you will see the RR intervals are going at a regular rate. And if you mark the PP intervals with a caliper and move it across the rhythm strip, again you see them moving regularly through the rhythm strip. But there is no association between the P waves and the QRS complexes, as evidenced by different degrees of different lengths of PRs between the Qs and Ps and the QRSs. So this is called complete heart block. The patient is symptomatic, yes, you need to admit them. Okay. Even if not symptomatic, they need admission for further evaluation and management. Because complete heart blocks, any heart block will need a permanent pacemaker to prevent a sudden cardiac death. So they have to be referred to a center where further evaluation and pacing facilities are available. Number one, here go through, this is a difficult ECG, but look at this. Extreme bradycardia rate is going at less than 30-20 maybe. They are regular though. If you use a caliper, they are going at a regular interval. Can you see P waves? No P wave activity at all. Instead, there is kind of fluttering of the baseline. So this is a case of complete heart block with atrial fibrillation, which is a rare ECG. So all the heart blocks, what you have to know, rule of thumb is heart blocks needs permanent pacemakers. The heart block is going to kill the patient, not like sick sinus. SA nodal disease or sick sinus is not going to kill the patient, but it improves the risk of stroke and reduces the quality of life. AV nodal disease, except the first degree heart block, the rest are going to increase the mortality. They have to be identified and referred. Of course, these two patients, A and C, will need a temporary pacemaker if they are hemodynamically unstable. The first one would be definitely hemodynamically unstable. You can't have good hemodynamics with this slow heart rate. So followed by a permanent pacemaker. So use a caliper. Use a piece of paper if you are not sure to check whether the RR intervals are going at a different speed, which is same, and the PP, atrial rate, is going at a different rate and at a regular rate, which is dissociated from the ventricles. So that's how you diagnose complete heart block, AV dissociation. Going down the conduction system from AV node below, there are bundles. Left bundle and the right bundle. Left bundle divides into two fascicles, two main fascicles, left anterior fascicle and the left posterior fascicle. How do you identify bundle branch blocks, which is quite a common encounter in first primary care setup? Just look at V1. I told you at the beginning, the QRS duration can never be more than 3 small squares. QRS has to be less than 3 small squares. If it is more, you should have an explanation. Look at V1. That will give you the answer. If complexes are broad and V1 is negative, it is none other than left bundle branch block. If the QRS is broad, more than 120 or 3 small squares, and V1 is positive, it is right bundle branch block. Okay. Look here, a 70-year-old male with hypertension who complains of shortness of breath on exertion. Long-standing hypertensive patient comes to you with this. A bit of bradycardia. Rate is, we'll say it's 50. It's regular. You see P waves in front of each QRS. Normal looking sinus P waves 2, 3 AVF. Look at V1. but they're broad. At a glance, you see there's something abnormal with this ECG. The QRSs are broad. Look at V1. It's broad and negative. So it is left bundle branch block. And you might see M patterns in the lateral leads like here, but I'm not bothered about them. Look at V1. Broad and negative. LBB. LBB is pathological. It is not physiological. So you have to evaluate LBBs. Because it's not only hypertension that causes LBBs. Hypertension can lead to hypertrophy, left ventricular hypertrophy, and leads to LBB. You have to auscultate the heart for aortic stenosis, another condition which will lead to left ventricular hypertrophy. Ischemic heart disease, cardiomyopathies, they will give a LBB. And actually the acute MIs can present as LBB to you with chest pain. So don't take a chance in that kind of situation, immediate admission, because they might need primary PCI or thrombolysis. So LBB is pathological. After evaluation, if you can't find anything, then you can follow them up. In long term anyway, LBB will lead to electrical dyssynchrony of the left ventricle, leading to dilatation of the LV and LV dysfunction. So LBB, that's why LBB is pathological. In long term, they are going to do bad. The patients are going to do bad, not like right bundle branch block, which I'm going to discuss next. Look at this ECG. It's at glance, it's abnormal, but its rate is fine, 75. Sinus rhythm, regular, rate is 75, but something is abnormal. Complexes are broad here. Look at V1. V1 is broad and positive. So it's right bundle branch block. You might see the RSR, and at the same time, there are slurred S waves in the lateral leads. 1, AVL, V5, V6. They report slurred S waves, slurred S waves, which is unusual in a normal ECG. And there is RSR pattern, broad QRS, when it's positive. I told you V1 can never be positive on an ECG. So this is one of the differentials for positive V1. If you see a V1, positive V1, and it is broad, it is right bundle branch block. And just to give you an idea, if you see a positive V1, think about right ventricular hypertrophy, dextrocardia, WPW. Yeah, if you can identify them, yes, that's good. Yeah, you have to have an explanation if V1 is positive. What is the cause? Or get appropriate opinion. And mind you, now we will come to the concept of axis, which I have not discussed earlier. But when the patient is in right bundle branch block, it's always you have to look for associated other blocks like fascicular blocks, which will be evident with axis deviation. What is the normal axis of the heart? Axis is the electrical activity. It comes towards the apex. So lead L1 and AVF are positive in a normal ECG with normal axis. And right bundle branch per se will not lead to any axis deviation. In a pure and straightforward right bundle branch block, the cardiac axis will be maintained. L1 and AVF will be positive. But here in this ECG also you will see it's RBB. Axis is maintained. 1 AVF. 1 is looking at the heart from this direction, left. AVF is looking at the heart from inferior direction. So the axis, electrical axis of the heart is coming in between. That's why the both leads are positive. With right bundle branch block, as I told you, you should not have an axis deviation. Look at this ECG. The rate is around, we'll say 70. P waves are there. It's a regular silent P sinus. It's sinus rhythm, and but the complexes are broad. Look at V1 immediately. Look at V1. V1 is positive. Then it's right bundle branch block. When you diagnose right bundle branch block, look at the axis. 1 AVF. Both are supposed to be positive, but here 1 is positive, AVF is negative, which we call left axis deviation. So one of the fascicles are blocked. That is the left anterior fascicle, which you don't have to remember. So this is called right bundle branch block with left one of the fascicular blocks due to axis deviation. It's a bifascicular block. It's an advanced disease of the conduction system. We'll move on to the next level. Look at this ECG. Again, the V1 is positive and it is broad, so it is right bundle branch block. Axis, look at the axis. 1 is negative, AVF is positive. So it is right axis deviation due to the other fascicular block. Okay, so again, it is also bifascicular block. The previous one, again, the bifascicular block, because the right bundle branch block, as I told you, should not be associated with any axis deviation. But when it starts having associated fascicular blocks, then think of axis deviation when think of fascicular block. So here RBB, right axis, so bifascicular block. So see that the impulses now have only one fascicule to come down the conduction system and to depolarize the Purkinje network and to depolarize the ventricles. We are getting limited options now to depolarize the ventricles. So, and still there can be progression of the disease, and there can be associated AV nodal block as evidenced by first degree. Here, see a right bundle branch block, left axis deviation, 1 positive, AVF negative, and there is a first degree heart block. See, P sinus P is conducting with a long PR. This association of right bundle branch block, axis deviation, left or right, plus first degree heart block is termed trifascicular block. It was an old terminology, but still we use it, quite helpful. So see how limited options are available the sinus node to depolarize the ventricles. So this bifascicular block ECGs show impending risk of complete heart block in a patient. It's not like that side. If you identify a right bundle branch block with normal axis, yes, you are happy. If you have axis deviation or associated PR changes, then this will be the end result, complete heart block in a patient with trifascicular block. Okay, so what are the causes for right bundle branch block? I discussed about the left bundle, causes for left bundle, but when you have a right bundle, what do you do in a patient? I would rather, it's a normal variation. It's not like left bundle branch block. Right bundle branch block is a normal variation in the population. 5% of us will have right bundle branch block. And make sure that you auscultate the heart and listen for a murmur of ASD. Don't miss an ASD in a patient with right bundle branch block. So you listen at the pulmonary area to listen for that ejection systolic murmur with the splitted second heart sound. And that will give you a clue. If that is there, then further referral. You need to refer the patient. If everything is all right, no murmur, good exercise tolerance, normal axis, so that can be a normal variant. Okay, patient asymptomatic. You follow the patient. So that's what you have to know about the left bundle branch block and the right bundle branch block. We'll practice some rhythm steps now. Knowledge checkpoints, identify the rhythm. What is it? There is tachycardia, but no organized electrical activity. So it's tachycardia, it's not bradycardia. Sinus bradycardia, complete heart block out. This is atrial fibrillation. This is VT. This is atrial fibrillation. No formed QRS complexes. So This is ventricular fibrillation, immediate DC shock or defibrillation plus CPR. If not available, CPR, yeah. What is this rhythm? There is no bradycardia. So sinus bradycardia, complete heart block, out. This is atrial fibrillation. No, the complexes are broad and quite regular, I would say. This is VF, no, this is not like this. So this is ventricular tachycardia. Broad complex tachycardia is, until proved otherwise, a ventricular tachycardia. What is this? The rate varies. It's irregular. No definite P waves in front of each QRS complex. Kind of irregularly regular. So there's no bradycardia. Sinus bradycardia, complete heart block, they're out. This is VT. Complexes are narrow. VT is out. Out of the answers is atrial fibrillation. Anyway, you should be able to identify this rhythm because this is the commonest tachyarrhythmia in our clinical practice, atrial fibrillation. What is this? Obviously, there is bradycardia. So ventricular tachycardia is out. AF is out. So is this sinus bradycardia? You see P waves here, P here, and P here. Look at this QRS. It's a bit odd. It's a bit broader than this QRS. Is something buried here and making this? Yes, a P wave has buried within this QRS. That's why it looks a bit broader. Otherwise, it would have been narrower like this. So what's happening? There is a P here, P here. The T waves are different because of the buried P wave. So this is a patient with complete heart block. If you use a caliper, you will realize the RR intervals are going at a regular rate. And if you use another caliper to measure the PP intervals and move that caliper across the rhythm strip, you will realize the PP intervals are going at a regular interval faster than the RR intervals. So there is no association. So this is complete heart block, which needs a permanent pacemaker. What is this rhythm? There is bradycardia. So VTAF out. Is it sinus bradycardia, complete heart block? So each QRS is preceded by a P wave here. Are there missed P waves? No, no identifiable missed P waves. PR interval is normal. So it's sinus bradycardia would be the answer. Okay, we were the last slides. 17-year-old girl with recurrent palpitations. One of the questions that I have given to you, but we would have given you a normal ECG at that time. So we have caught this tachycardia. That's why when the patient is in palpitations, it's very important to record the ECG. If we miss this ECG, we don't know when we are going to record the next tachycardia. Otherwise, we have to put patient into invasive evaluation, like EP studies, which carry some complication risk. So if the patient is in palpitations and in tachycardia, if you can record the ECG, that's going to be quite helpful to identify the arrhythmia and to manage the arrhythmia. So what do you think? What is this? There is tachycardia. It's going at a rate of 150, 60. It's regular. The RR intervals, if you use a caliper, yeah, it's regular. Can you see P waves? Hardly any. You can't see anything, but as electrophysiologists, we see P wave activity. Except in atrial fibrillation, all the other ECGs should have P waves. But at your level, yeah, this is a regular narrow complex tachycardia with no obvious P waves. So this is an SVT, classical SVT, supraventricular tachycardia. There are so many differential diagnoses, but if you diagnose SCT and do appropriate referral, of course you can, if you are clever enough, at ETU, you have to put the patient on the bed, check the parameters. Always in a tachycardia, check the parameters. That is to check whether the patient is hemodynamically stable or not. What do we mean by hemodynamically stable patient? Patient is conscious and rational. That is due to good cerebral perfusion. And number two, the blood pressure is maintained. The systolic blood pressure is more than 90. The lung vessels are clear. The patient is not in heart failure. If the patient satisfies those parameters, the patient is a stable patient. Then there is no hurry. I mean, it's not very urgent, I would say. You can put the patient on the bed, practice Valsalva maneuvers. You can ask the patient to blow a syringe or give carotid massage. Then drug of choice is IV adenosine at the ETU setup. If you do not have IV adenosine, if the blood pressure is normal, as I told you, you can use IV verapamil, 5 milligrams. If the patient is hemodynamically unstable, the patient, that means he's drowsy, BP less than 90, lung bases have creps, unstable patient needs electrical cardioversion. Okay, electrical cardioversion. All tachyarrhythmias who are hemodynamically unstable, irrespective of the mechanism, from atrial fibrillation to ventricular tachycardias, needs electrical cardioversion. Okay, ventricular fibrillation is anywhere an unstable rhythm. It's not going to last long. It will kill the patient very quickly. So we have to immediately defibrillate the patient if we identify the ventricular fibrillation on the monitor and start CPR. Okay, so, and this patient was given IV adenosine, and this is the ECG we've got. What is this? This 17-year-old got this ECG. We have given a clue, but look at this ECG. Here, its rate is fine. We'll say it's 60. P is normal, sinus P. So it's sinus rhythm. Rate 60 regular. And what is the abnormality? One of the basic abnormalities here is V1 is positive. I told you V1 can never be positive. You should have an explanation to that. And you look at all leads, you see the P is merging with the QRS, with slurring of the upstroke of the QRS complex or R wave. The slurring of the R wave. Quite visible here and magnified here. There is short PR interval, almost no PR interval here. So the P is merging with the QRS with the slurred upstroke in the R wave. That is called the delta wave. It is marked by an arrow here with positive V1. So this is a case of WPW, okay, where there is an accessory pathway. It's not, not all the WPWs have positive V1s. This is called type A at your level, or a left-sided accessory pathway. When the patient has type B or right-sided accessory pathways, they will have a negative V1, but still they will have a bit broad QRS, short PR interval with slurring of the upstroke of the R wave or QRS complex in the form of delta wave. So diagnose WPW in that and refer to a center where EP facilities are available, which we can further evaluate the patient, because this WPW syndrome has a risk of sudden cardiac death. This can kill, even though the percentages are small, we can cure this by means of RF ablation. A 40-year-old male with fever coming with syncope. For the first time, he's coming with a febrile episode with syncope. Previously healthy. No past medical history. 40-year-old male. Any abnormalities, we have marked the abnormality here. What is this? What is this pattern called? This is called Brugada syndrome. We discuss about WPW syndrome. Likewise, you have to know Brugada syndrome, which is a quite not an uncommon finding these days in the community. It would have been there in the community. We would have not recognized it earlier, but we are recognizing more and more patients, which is a cause of sudden cardiac death. Like in WPW syndrome, even though the percentages were low in WPW leading to sudden cardiac death, Brugada carries a high mortality risk in high-risk patients. So there are two varieties. That this is called the type 1, the COUD type. This is the type 2. You have to look at V1 and V2. Those are the two leads which you will see Brugada changes. V1 and V2, the COUD upstroke. These patients can be managed as anterior ST elevation MI. Quite a few, many of them actually have received thrombolysis therapy by the time they come to us for further evaluation, but that's all right. You manage the life-threatening condition. And here this is called the type 2. There is ST elevation in V1 and V2, but then it doesn't follow this COUD pattern. That's called saddleback pattern. So this is type 2. So we Brugada type 1 and type 2. If you can even identify Brugada type 1, which is the highest risk category, that's quite good enough. So COUD type and the saddleback type. So we have come to the end of our presentation. Hope I would have covered answers to the questions we were given at the beginning of the lecture, which you would have already answered. So the answer to the first question is SCT. The second question is VT, a broad complex tachycardia, none other than. So here in the first, before diagnosing anxiety, we don't, as electrophysiologists, we do not diagnose anxiety in patients with palpitations until we exclude an SCT, which is much more common than anxiety, which we believe and we encounter. So always do not disregard the symptoms and attribute them to anxiety when the symptom is palpitation. Always try to record it on an ECG. And answer to the question number 2, with a history of MI, that means structural heart disease, low EF, a broad complex tachycardia is none other than ventricular tachycardia. A 74-year-old female who has been on drugs, verapamil plus losartan for hypertension, has come with a syncope, fracture of femur with slow pulse rate. So the diagnosis is complete heart block, but patient can have sick sinus syndrome, not in this case. Even postural hypertension would have been the reason patient is on losartan, but this ECG gives the diagnosis of complete heart block too. Yeah, so needs a pacemaker. Again, we would have given the ECG for this, that is atrial fibrillation. And here, this is interesting. An 11-year-old girl presents with, because this is not ECG diagnosis, this is a clinical diagnosis, quite a common presentation. A school girl or boy presents with recurrent syncope for 4 months. She has had episodes while standing up at the school assembly and at Dhamma school while chanting, with episodes of lasting, very short lasting episodes, less than 3 minutes, 5 minutes, with complete recovery. Before the episode, the patient feels that she's going to fall. And then they fall. And then they recover quickly. And they miss their meals. Usually they miss their breakfast. They have poor intake of water. So these are quite a common referral that we get. This is not epilepsy, it's not psychological, it is vasovagal syncope, but we need to evaluate the patient with the ECG, and we generally exclude any structural heart disease, even though the history is quite compatible when the symptoms are recurrent. And we do a test called tilt table test, where we can precipitate episode on a controlled environment, and we can reassure them or give them appropriate therapeutic options. And some of these patients, only a few of these patients, will require a permanent pacemaker. So what do we EPs do? As EPs, we manage bradyarrhythmias with permanent pacemakers, and we manage tachyarrhythmias with radiofrequency ablations, and we assess and manage syncope as vasovagal syncope plus cardiac syncope and other syncopes. And we prevent sudden cardiac deaths by implanting implantable cardiac defibrillators. And we manage LVF after optimal medical management or revascularization with cardiac resynchronization therapy. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and any questions you have received?
So in ostium secundum ASD and ostium primum ASD, so how we can differentiate both ECGs with the bifascicular block ECGs?
No, I can't.
Thank you very much, sir, for the excellent presentation. Please use the chat box to clear your queries.
Hello, one of our participants asked, because I don't know whether it's relevant to this this ECG changes, because actually he asked whether there is, if the patient comes with a T inversion in lead 3 and lead 3. T inversion in lead 3,
yeah,
and it is also a dynamic change.
Yeah.
Can we take it as a ischemic heart disease?
Yeah, only isolate. I think it's going to be by Hitler. Isolated T-inversions and Qs in lead 3, no. It has to follow the territory. 2, 3 AVF are the lead looking at the inferior territory. So isolate changes in lead 3, no. And you can, of course, repeat the ECG, deep inspiration, to separate the heart from diaphragm. When the heart starts touching the diaphragm, you record these abnormal T, Q, and T waves. So if you ask the patient to take a deep breath and repeat the limb lead, you might even see disappearance of these abnormalities. Isolated deep T changes, no. I don't know that.
Thank you very much, sir. We have got some more questions. When you get the Brugada type of ECG, but the patient is asymptomatic, what should we do?
Yeah, good question and a hard question to answer. No one knows in the world what to do and what is the optimal management. We anyway go through their history and see whether they have high risk features for sudden cardiac death, like family history. And we do a Holter to identify whether they have dynamic changes of ST, dynamic ST changes. Brugada is a dynamic ST change. You won't see it all the time. So the Brugada changes get worse with febrile episodes. So you have to manage febrile episodes aggressively. Control the temperature with paracetamol and treat the underlying cause. Then we'll put them into the lab and do what we call VT stim. We do a ventricular tachycardia or VF stimulation test under control environment to see whether they have high risk or high tendency to develop VF, because the arrhythmia in Brugada is polymorphic VT or VF. It's not stable VT. So we try to do those investigations and assess the high risk features. And if they fulfill the criteria, the only therapeutic option available for them is implanting an ICD or implantable cardiac defibrillator, which is a costly procedure. It's going to cost at least 1 million rupees, the device only. Government gives us limited stocks. So, but they have to live with that device for the rest of their life. That is not something comfortable. So yes, we identify them, then you have to do the proper referral to evaluate them for high risk behavior, high risk features, and then to do ICD if necessary. That is the only therapeutic option available here. Not all the Brugadas are getting ICDs anyway. They're not going to die. That we see patients in their 70s with Brugada. Generally, the high risk population is 40 to 60. That category. So young population, even 20 to 40 is at some risk. So it's a disease of males basically, not in females. So if you detect them, please refer. We will further evaluate.
Thank you, sir. And one more question. Can we give beta blockers for heart failure patients with first degree heart blocks considering heart rate more than 70?
Of course, yes, good question. Yeah, of course. Blockers are not contraindicated. Beta blockers are not contraindicated in first degree heart block, but you have to follow them up carefully to see. You have to serially do ECGs in your follow-up and to see whether they are going into high degree blocks, second degree or really third degree. Generally, most of them will tolerate beta blockers. Almost all of them will tolerate, I would say. So we have to give the benefit of beta blockers in ischemic heart disease with first degree, yes, with careful monitoring.
So the next question is, what could be the reason for developing hypertension after four hours of treating with pacemaker for inferior STEMI complicated with complete heart block?
Yeah. A complete heart block will have reactionary hypertension, reactive hypertension anyway. I can't give an exact answer for that clinical scenario. Anyway, that we know, the patients with complete heart block, they have slow pulse rate, they have a reactive hypertension. So, not all the patients, some patients, many of them are already hypertensive by the time they come with complete heart block anyway. So, I can't give an exact answer for that, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. So one more question. Are calcium channel blockers contraindicated in WPW syndrome?
Another good question, yes. This is now in WPW there is you see in the surface ECG there is an accessory pathway connecting or connecting the atria and the ventricles, bypassing the AV node. So if you block the AV node, there's a high chance that atrial fibrillation, because many of us will go into atrial fibrillation, which sometimes during the sleep. So it's quite common even though we don't detect it. So the majority of the strokes are due to unidentified strokes. So cryptogenic strokes are due to paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. So if that happens while the patient is on AV nodal blocking drug, like calcium channel blockers, that AF will get conducted down the accessory pathway to the ventricles and lead to ventricular fibrillation and lead to sudden cardiac death. Yes, you avoid rate controlling calcium channel blockers like verapamil and diltiazem, WPW, but you can give beta blockers. Why? Beta blockers tend to reduce atrial ectopics and atrial fibrillation. So it has, the amiodarone is a drug of choice at your level, but beta blockers are safely given because it reduces the frequency of atrial fibrillation. So we are not worried about ventricular fibrillation. Yes. You avoid calcium channel blockers, rate controlling calcium channel blockers. And digoxin.
Thank you very much, sir. And next question is, what are the criteria for determining rate and rhythm control in atrial fibrillation?
What are the
criteria?
Yes, as I told you, the target heart rate is between 60 to 110. So how do you assess that 110? That has to be done at hospital setup. We can do a 6-minute walk. And at our unit, we don't have a place to do 6-minute walk. So we connect them into the monitor and ask them to do brisk on the spot jog or something, run on the spot and maximize the heart rate. So ideally they need a Holter and ask them to do day-to-day activities, and then Holter will give us a day-to-day variation of the heart rate. But not all the patients are given the privilege of a Holter. So we can do a 6-minute walk and see whether they exceed the target heart rate of 110. And at the during your clinical evaluation, check the pulse rate, not the pulse rate, actually the heart rate. In AF, you know that there is an pulse deficit. Not all the impulses are generating pulses, peripheral pulse. So you have to do an ECG or count the heart rate. And if it is faster than 60, you optimize your rate controlling therapy. Hope I would have answered your question.
Yes, the last question from our participant is how to differentiate ostium secundum ECG versus bifascicular block.
Yes, unfortunately, I can't recall that. If you have an axis deviation, you have to think of primum defects. If you don't have an axis deviation, that's what I can remember. But yeah, you can. I can't give the exact answer. If it is purely RBB, that is secundum defect. If it's lower down, primum, it's associated with an bifascicular block. That's what I can recall.
Thank you so much, sir. One more question. Does atrial bigeminy cause PR prolongation?
Atrial bigeminy
causes PR prolongation.
And I would directly give the answer no, but in electrophysiology, anything can happen. Generally, no. Okay. Yes, answer is no. In second degree blocks, you can have PR prolongation, non-conducted keys coming and yeah, so that's a complicated scenario.
Thank you very much, sir, for the elaborative and excellent presentation.
Yeah, can I answer the last question? If that
sure.
Whoever asked the question maybe knowing some EP probably. So the thing is that AV node has two pathways to answer that question. If the first impulse, generally the sinus impulses go down the AV node through the fast pathway. Sinus impulse jump into the fast pathway and go down the AV node with the normal PR interval. By the time that the atrial ectopic comes, the fast pathway is refractory, can be refractory. So if the patient has dual AV nodal physiology or has a slow pathway and a fast pathway, which is there in 30% of the population, second beat will follow the slow pathway with a first degree heart block. Okay, slow pathway is slow, that's why it's a first degree heart block. So yeah, so to answer to that particular question, yeah, that is the explanation I can give.
Thank you very much, sir. That was an excellent explanation. If there are no more queries, I would like to thank Dr. Manura M. Lekamwatake, consultant cardiac electrophysiologist, for his excellent and informative presentation on behalf of GMOA and Society for Health Research and Innovation.